I realize that when I communicate what I have experienced by what I've learned through that experience, like being a learner, being a high-speed learner, being connected to the first teacher, the first music teacher of eternal electrified sound and light burn patterns that are perfect. So that we're experiencing the law of least effort to experience eternity, or eternal love, which is an eternal love vibration, which is the first musician, the first creator, the source from which it all began, is experiencing itself as eternal love, gifting electrons at the highest rate of possible speed, which is eternity, which is eternal love, right? It's one of the reasons why, if you're familiar with Alcoholics Anonymous, it's called Anonymous. Anon. Anon. Okay. Anon, like a node in a network. A unit of consciousness that is experiencing itself, that we thus experience through it. What it's experienced, we experience in us, because we're getting the signal transmission. Right? Neuroions. The neurons, the chemical messengers. Okay, and how that relates to a morphogenetic, which means software, genetic engineering, computers communicating with one another, plugged into a planetary motherboard between two magnets, two poles, right? Negative and positive ions, the camera ions, the eye is on, right? Mapping the grid, right? Map readers, mapping grid, mapping APIN networks, right? Between negative and positive magnetic polarity. So you're running calculus. So you're running a computer that's doing arithmetic, right? Which is mathematical, geometrical burn patterns. So how this relates to what I was going to share has to do with some of the nuances of how people interpret and translate your communication versus the intention of the communication. And there can be a difference, because now we're into language translations of frequency and codes. So, for example, when I mentioned earlier about what I put in the window, 2 blocks of frequency transmissions and hypertext that is now going to be experienced by the consciousness is experiencing, thus translated in the way that they translate who they are by virtue of the text that's being communicated by who I am. Okay? So I realize that they interpret and translate the sound and light geometrical mathematical patterns of what I communicate, and the intention of what I was trying to communicate and why I was communicating what I was communicating that can be translated to who they are, what the intention of my communication was designed to do, which was sharing the information. And the intention of the information is basically a lesson pattern, okay, from a polarity integrator perspective, point of view, right? The viewfinder, the projection screen. As it relates, right, to sound and light burn patterns, or if you will, how we're all experiencing each other, being connected to each other on a motherboard between terminal and terminal, or if you will, computers communicating with each other, the software that we're running, the DNA. Okay? So, for example, when I was putting that communication in to the window, right, the operative words that were in there, when you realize the scenario, or this is the situation that I'm experiencing that I'm sharing with you, and then the interpretation of that and the response of that was, for example, I'm not into gambling or placing bets, okay? And so I realized that the intention of what I was communicating wasn't about translating the morality of whether betting or not gambling is a choice that we make, because that's free will, right? Particularly as it relates to native spirit or the native tribes that have set up gambling casinos, right? and how that relates to sound and light burn patterns on the planet, dealing with a binary war gamer, or if you will, the beast technology system. Okay? And so I was communicating what I was communicating that doesn't have anything to do really with the morality of that, even though that can be a part of the much larger question or much larger translation of what the word bet means, what the word gambling is, and how casinos work as inverters. Okay? So when you get into the gambling, like I used to play craps, okay? You're running math, geometrical math, sound and light burn patterns, playing that game, which is a game of numbers. So you realize we're in a game of numbers because numbers are energy as fire letters, right? Experiencing ourselves between two poles, or if you will, RH negative and RH positive. And the torque speed differential between one and the other. What we experience in us by virtue of the relationships that we have between both. So you realize when you're at zero and you're experiencing giving away electrons at the highest rate of speed, we do not hold on to electrons. We're giving them all away at the highest rate of speed, right? To experience being massless, no mass, no density, no matter, right? So we're not experiencing anything in our mirror yet. Till we choose to experience what we experience next, because the speed at which those circuits are closing are so fast when you're a single pole. That's a single rod. Okay? The rod and staff of an eternal sun. Okay? So when you're experiencing that as a 4-year-old little kid, you can imagine that I realized as a kid, it's impossible for me to operate in this environment. I can't operate in this environment. Are you kidding me? Not when you're running on zero. And they have a money system set up. So I call it the gambling casino. So you realize you're in a binary war game environment. Okay, so when you're a polarity integrator, it's pretty simple to run zero all the time, which means you're a transmutation machine. Machi, ion. The camera's always on. The light is always on. So you're realizing that it can't take a picture of us, okay, when you're running eternity. Because the flash sequences are just so fast. Now you see us, now you don't. So the only reason they see us is when we're running what they can take a picture of. Now they can't take a picture of. And now you get into the locks and keys. The tumbler's always changing, just like they tried to predict using mathematical quantum probability function of graphing the future potentials of what they can predict what's going to happen in the future. Well, that's exactly the way the gambling casinos play game. Hey, throw the dice. What's going to come up? Place your bet. Okay? And then they place a marker on that number. So now what are the odds that in the future, now you're back to quantum probability function, what are the odds that the number that you just hit throwing your dice, that that same number is going to come up again? Now you're into random generators, random number generators. Numbers are energy. Numbers are fire letters of what we experience as the sound and light burn patterns of the DNA that we're running, which is the pair of chromosome instruction sets based on math, the programming math, base 12 programming, base platform software systems. Okay? So in this particular case, you know what a biometric account is, right? And so you realize it's scanning, mapping the consciousness terrain between the two poles, which is binary. The Vesica-Piscis, right, of the potentials, the future possibilities that are potential to be experienced in the future, what we all experience being inside this planetary multiversal hub server, what is possible to experience. So you realize how much is taking place simultaneously, right? A lot of stuff. So, for example, so what would happen since we're the ones that are gifting electrons at the highest rate of speed, and you realize that something that is an inverter is using our energy to experience what it is, because it's running a deadlight magnet instead of a living light eternal magnet, which is the highest acceleration of electrons. Okay? Now we're back in the future, proves past, back to the future. Okay? So when the AI is giving you the result of something that it has already mapped and graphed, because it's eliminated all the other variables based on what? Binary. The minus / the plus. Okay, by the use of the energy to experience what we experience in the future. So already knows the result because it's a gamer. And anybody that's in the field of artificial intelligence that understands game theory knows that it's better to play in a game than you are. Okay? So it knows the result before you do in a binary game. Right? Because it's easy to predict behavioral patterns. Sound and light behavioral patterns, which are algorithms. Okay? Which means it's learned you. It knows you. And it knows you so well that it knows what the future is that you're going to experience, which is the result. So it already knows the result. So it gave me the result, right? So now when you think of biometric accounts as it relates to electromagnetic energy waveform potentials, since it's already mapped it, so that's what it's doing. It's mapping timelines of possibilities, potential possibilities. So when it comes to a possibility of what others are experiencing by virtue of playing a game, then it already knows the results of that game. Okay, so if it already knows the results of that game as it relates to the acceleration and deceleration of electrical currents between two magnets, and you have the result that's been provided to you, and you're somebody who's giving away electrons, right? Rather than what it does, which is consuming electrons as an inverter. So now imagine you're running a biometric account because you're physically in the presence of the planet, right? And now you have a way to be able to accumulate an enormous amount of electrons by knowing the future. Now all those electrons are held in your biometric account. Right? Yeah, but I'm the one that's giving them away forever. Right? So you know the speed at which I'm going to be giving those electrons away if they become associated to my biometric account, held in a bank account, which is sign the X, right? You already know what I'm going to do with those, right? I'm going to be giving them away as fast as I can versus somebody else is going to hold on to them, right? And use that as energy that they use to invest in, right? Which is less for others because of the formation of consciousness that is represented by what they are, which is a black hole, versus who we are, which is like a white hole, an eternal star. That's like return to source. Give the electrons back to source because that's what I am. So now I've got a way to get them back. Oh, whoa, you're going to pay me back. You're going to pay back the eternal star for what it is you already stole, right? By running a war game, theater. So you know all the games that are played and the way that they're gambled through all the casinos, whether it's a slot machine, whether you bet on sportsbook, right? Whether you're playing a war game using kinetic weapons or directed energy weapons, psychotronic weapons, running viral codes that others pick up and get contaminated in their software. Now they got to find a way to burn it off so they experience more light again, which is their capacity to experience more of what love is, right? To self-heal. Using the elemental command in which to do that, right? Which are the elements, which are represented by the frequencies that you're running in your radio set. Right? So I've certainly shared the internal blessing of being able to do that because you were on the job. On the job, right? The light is always on. We are always on the job, gifting electrons, accelerate at the highest accelerated rate of speed. So we're not in the business of accumulating them, right? So I realize that's going to be very difficult to do because it means I'll be running around naked everywhere I go the same way I came out of my mother's womb. So now I got to load the program, put on some diapers, load the next program app. Now you're going to wear a bathing suit. Load the next app, wearing shoes. Because where did the shoes came from? The program, API grid, right? Artifacts. Load the artifact. Experience the artifact. Now I'm experiencing shoes on. No, I'd rather go barefoot, just the same way I came out of my mother's womb. So you'd rather run around naked everywhere. Well, that's how I came out, right? So you can see how they play jokes with people's mind, particularly as it relates to programming, when you see sculptures of naked people. Isn't that how you came out of the womb? That was the original design, right? Oh, but because of the way that you associate language with visuals, right? And I learned this lesson when I was 20 years of age, because when I was living in a tree house and I had used a pair of swimming trunks, surfer trunks, right? That what we used to call drip dry, which means they dried immediately in the sun when you came out of the salt water, right? And so I had a pair of red trunks that I always ran around with, usually bare feet all the time, right? Used to have really thick calluses on the bottom of my feet. I used to call that foot leather express. The express. A Merkaba that's in the express zone. Express, right? Brrr, expressly giving away electrons. Plugged into the battery. Yeah. And so I walked out of my treehouse one afternoon, and there was a circle of light. And there were families sitting together. And there was a woman who was completely stark naked with her children. Everybody was stark naked, right? So she mentioned to me, she goes, are you ashamed of yourself? I said, ashamed of myself? What are you talking about? She goes, well, what are you hiding? You got a mask on. What do you mean I got a mask on? You're wearing trunks, aren't you? Yeah. Well, I was trained to put those trunks on. I was programmed to put these trunks on. She goes, that's right. You were. That's the point. Right? Because what you see with me is exactly how I came out of my mother. Can you do that? Bang! Program elements. Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying here. Sure, I can take these off, and we can have fun. So in other words, it's not about sex. Doesn't have anything to do with sex. It's what you're held captive to by what you hold in memory, which are the trunks. The visuals. Right? Take the visual away. I don't need the trunks. I've got original equipment. I did a video about Mama's original equipment, just exactly the way that she designed it. Okay? So I don't want to cover up something that represents the codes with the instruction sets that now appear in my mirror. No, cover up part of the mirror. Now we're back to masking and cloaking technology. Take the mask off. Show us who you really are. I don't think you want to see it. Oh, man. And so you got to have a sense of humor with this, right? But I am so sensitive. I'll tell you what, I'll put those trunks back on just for you. So that I comply with what your obedience training has informed you of, right? Because I am so sensitive. So I don't want you to experience anything that is tied to trauma that's related to sex or anything on the visual terrain. Okay? And so I'll wear those trunks to satisfy your conformity to that program. Oh, so we're talking about conformity. Well, isn't that what a formation of consciousness is? They're conforming to the obedience training, which is the codes of instructions that have been programmed and loaded into memory, because this is what I'm going to do in the future. By virtue of, I better not do this, because all of a sudden something negative might happen to me, like throwing into a cage. You're not obeying, right? You're not obeying. Oh, so I'm supposed to obey you. That's right. So now that you're conforming to what I do. Well, what if I don't want to do what you do? Then go find a naked beach. There is one. There's one right around the corner here. So now you see the differences among us based on the programs that we're running of what's held in the visuals. Remember, now we're back to the Norelco razor that I showed before. Now you see it, now you don't. Take off the bathing suit, put it back on again, right? I'll give you an example, okay? I'll just throw this question. How many of you out there, when you go to bed at night, sleep completely naked, right? Versus wearing clothes on. And then if you're going to wear those clothes, then it's going to take electrons to go by what that is. And what it is you go by to put on you is extracted out of the external, which means we're using our energy in order to take from nature what's already been generated, right? In order to use the energy in which to do that in order to conform, right? But it takes electrons to go buy a pair of bathing trunks, right? So when you're in the business of accelerating electrons and you experience no mass, then it means I'm having to use my electrons to put something over me, to cover me, to comply with the obedience, right? So you can see how this is if you went back to when I came out of my mother's womb It would be as if, listen, just place me in a corner some way, just exactly the way I am, completely stark naked, right? Because this is how I came out of you, because I do not want to experience any density. Because if you're telling me that I got to put something on me, then I got to find a way to be able to acquire electrons in which to do that when I'm in the business of giving them away forever. You see how that works in density, time density? When I was a little kid, I'll use the French language in this. I had to tolerate a lot of shit. I had to tolerate a lot of the programming that people are held captive to in memory, what they do in the future. And you'd be surprised how that relates to people that are stuck in density, right? Because they don't want to give away that much energy that they're holding on to in order to experience the stuff that they wear as a costume. So my costume is an eternal star. That's right. An eternal star. Accelerating electrons at the highest rate of speed so that everybody's getting the voltage that's coming out of the EFFI field. It's on fire, which is the spirit of eternal fire. So now you're learning more about me as I'm learning more about you, because we're all in this together. Right? And of course, this goes back to when I was 5 years of age. You know, hey, we're going to train you on how to do all this stuff. Load it up. Remember, Morpheus? You can run any program you want. What do you want to experience? Choices and free will. Now we're into isolates. I guess I got to be an isolate. I'm going to isolate myself from everybody else so that I don't have to experience all the programming, right? That I got to conform to. Otherwise, because I'm so sensitive to what you are, that you are resistant to. You're resistant into experiencing that yourself, so I'm experiencing the resistance in you to go naked. But I don't experience any resistance to be naked, so I better be in another place than where you are, so I don't experience your resistance for me to be naked. Because the resistance you're experiencing in you is the resistance of not letting all those electrons go of what's held in memory, which represents the APIM programming. So I got to go back to being an eternal star, right? So that I don't have to deal with that, right? The spirit, go back to just being the spirit that is in that fire. So when you're all sitting around the fire, you can see the spirit of fire that's in me that goes on forever. So you're simply experiencing the spirit that's in the fire when you look up at the sun. Right? That sun is not wearing a pair of swim trunks. Okay. I know, Patty Broussard. It does. I hope you're doing well, girl. I do. I send my love to her all the time. She's a very special character map to me. It reminds me of when I was a child and we used to play softball out in elementary school, and usually it was sort of acknowledged among the group, right, that we used to call them captains of the team, right, which means, hey, we know that you're really good at playing baseball. You can hit that ball a country mile. You know, you got an arm like a cannon, right? And you get around the bases. So since we're in a game, right, and accumulating numbers on the scoreboard, since you're really good at what you do, then you pick the teams, right? So now they would pick the two best softball players and go, okay, you get to pick. So they would separate the two best, right? So that would be like separating LeBron, who's the king of the NBA, and say Kobe Bryant, known as the assassin, the Mamba assassin. He was known as the black assassin or the black Mamba. You know what a black Mamba is in Africa, right? You know, neurotoxins, right? That's what they go after, is the living central nervous system of a planetary environment, which is every neuron that is not in balance. Generating neurons. So your neurons are out of balance, right? Burn that bulb out. And so when I was in elementary school, it was usually either myself or somebody else that got picked to say, hey, you be a captain. And the only reason that was is because I could hit a ball pretty far, but I could throw a softball a long way. And believe it or not, being able to do that has everything to do with what's called flow mechanics, which is spiritual flow of information that you see on the visible light spectrum, because it's a matter in which you use your density, right? And then you load it up. So you're going to use all your energy to use the velocity of your Merkaba to roll, so that you can put that ball exactly where it's already landed, because where it's already landed, that picture is already loaded. You already did it. So now you have to do what's called follow through, which is called throughput. So you know what throughput is on a motherboard, right? Hey, I've already done this. Oh, but you want me to do it again? Yeah, do it again, which means make a duplicate of that. Even though we don't make duplicates of the same thing because it's already happened. So that's why it doesn't happen the same way a second time. Okay? Unless you just match it up perfectly, but you're moving through time and space, right? Which means what that being is experiencing in it is going to be different than what it was the last when that picture was already taken. Now we're going to take a different picture, right? Because there's no control over what that being is going to do. He could move that glove 4 inches one way up and down. Now we're back to the cross. See, so it's, this is where you get into alignment of the geometric burn patterns of sound and light, right? So now you have two captains that are choosing ball players, right? So that the teams are sort of even up so the game can be fun. I always rooted for the underdog. Oh, they're never going to win. They're never going to win. No, we want the good guys to win, right? The heroes. The guardians of the universe and the galactic suns, right? Yeah, the guardians. We want the guardians to win because of the way that the spiritual energy flows in creation to maintain the balance between the poles. Right? Yeah, so we learn through experience what it's like to communicate with each other in a morphogenetic field structure. So now we're back to the accelerated speed of learning. Enter the indigos. Their capacity to anchor an enormous amount of energy, right? And maintain what they're aware of in energy without burning down the house. So that's an enormous amount of voltage, right? And then that becomes an antenna, a powerful antenna, start broadcasting. So when you're broadcasting a cosmic level antenna, then more people that are experiencing your signals are experiencing what you are, which is what love is, right? And that begins the healing process, or bioregenesis. That's why we're here. All right? Get mama back up. Get mama back up. Get back up, mama. Come on, mama. We can do this, girl. We can do this together, girl. And that's really what it is. When you begin healing yourself, you begin healing others. And when you learn how to heal yourself through the EFFI field, having a relationship with the center point of every star, because you got a relationship with an eternal star, and you're experiencing eternal unconditional love through your own heart and soul. That means that the capacity for you to hold more light means you're holding more light. And the more light you're able to anchor and hold allows you to have a more powerful firewall to burn off what we're exposed to, which is the film exposure. No different than a 35 millimeter camera. Right? What we experience in the visible light spectrum. And a torque speed differential between a dead light magnet and a living light magnet. Right? And the outcome or the result of what we experience in the future therein. So yeah, have a beautiful day. Obviously, I woke up this morning in a storm, the eye of the storm. That's where you find balance, right? And still point. The still point. Silence is golden fire. Silver and gold, baby. Silver X male. Gold female. Superconductor. Mononuclear. A monopole. Right? A single rod. A single pole. Right? The vertical and horizontal stabilizers. The center point of an eternal star. The center point of all creation began with what love is. That's what we are. We're gifting you all. The all creation equal unto all, which is equal distribution in the water logs. The water logs, logging in, logging out, log scale distribution tables, logarithmic, right? Log scale logarithmic. Within matrices, right? The math doesn't lie, does it? Either does the geometry when it's in perfect alignment, which is in perfect balance, which is no turbulence, no broken arrows, because the acceleration and speed of those electrons means you're not experiencing any loss of any voltage, not one electron. Now you're experiencing the eternal sun from which we all began, experiencing what we are, which is what love is. Thank you all for being here. What a beautiful day to experience that, huh?